The City of Melbourne respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the land we govern, the Wurundjeri Wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin, and pays respect to their elders past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and honour the unbroken spiritual, cultural and political connection the Wurundjeri, Boonwurrung, Dja Dja Wurrung, Taungurung and Wadawurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin have to this unique place for more than 2,000 generations. We are committed to our reconciliation journey because, at its heart, reconciliation is about strengthening relationships between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal peoples for the benefit of all Victorians.
Hello everyone, how are you? Welcome to this Monash Tech Talk on Demystifying AI, hosted by a wonderful state library in Victoria during the Namnugu Melbourne Knowledge Week, which is presented by the City of Melbourne. My name is Maria Garcia de la Banda. I'm the Deputy Dean Research of the Faculty of Information Technology at Monash University. And I also want to start by respectfully asking all of us to physically and virtually, because we have some people connected via Zoom, well, actually via YouTube or streaming or something like that, and everyone physically and virtually to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land in which we are physically here today, and also acknowledge the peoples, the traditional owners and custodians of all the lands in which people who are joining us virtually are, and together pay respects to the elders, past, present and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islands peoples who are here today physically or virtually participating in this talk. Hello. I'm absolutely delighted to be here demystifying AI for three main reasons. First, because I'm a total nerd. I've loved science fiction since I can remember, and I've devoured everything: books, comics, movies, TV series, animations, everything. And you know, all AI in its forms, from the humanoid robots that we all know and love, play a huge part in this science fiction. Second, because my research is very connected to this. It started as a computational logic to represent knowledge and also to reason, and now is towards optimization problems, which is very much a small part, and we'll talk a little bit about the different parts of AI, a small part of what we call artificial intelligence. And therefore, I'm very aware of the great progress that we have done in AI, but also the hypes, the very big hype, the myths surrounding AI, and I know how important it is for all of us, researchers, non-researchers, people who apply it, people who use it, to demystify it and better understand it. And third, because I will have the pleasure of talking to all of you, to the wonderful audience, and also to our wonderful panel of experts. So let's get to know them. You will all have the bios online, so you have been able to have a look at who they are. So I'll just ask them to introduce themselves and explain very briefly the research interest and expertise in the AI context. So I'm going to start from here to the far side. Christoph, go for it.
Yeah, hello, I'm Christoph Bergmeier. I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Data Science and AI at Monash, and my main research focus is time series forecasting and using machine learning for that. And so usually when I go somewhere and I say I do time series forecasting, then people say, oh, so you do weather forecasting? And I say, no, not really. They say, oh, you're going to predict the stock market and we all get rich. And I say, that's also not really what I do, because for the weather forecasting we have people that are very specialized in that, and the stock market, it's very, very complicated. So I forecast pretty much anything else. Things like sales demand, you know, like a company that produces cheese to make cheese that takes maybe 8 months. So if they need to know how much are we going to sell in 8 months to know how much they need to produce today. And also like in renewable energy, we have a lot of forecasting problems and many other areas. And I use kind of automatic machine learning techniques from the data to do that. And other area, I mean, I also work in some other areas. I've worked in the past a lot in medicine and some other areas.
Very useful. Thank you so much. And Rashina.
Hi everybody, I'm Rashina Hoda. I'm an associate professor in software engineering at Monash. I'm also the deputy head of department of the software systems and cybersecurity department and the deputy director of the Humanize Lab. So the Humanize Lab is the human-centered software engineering lab. And as the name suggests, my research then is in the area of making sure that any software that is produced, including artificial intelligence, is human-centered. So we put the people at the heart of the process and make sure that we are abiding by human values, it's ethical, responsible, and so on. So that is, in a nutshell, what I do. I'm sure we'll be getting more into the details as the evening goes on, but yeah, that's me.
Thank you, Rashina. And Campbell.
Thank you, Maria. Hello, everyone. I'm Campbell Wilson, also from the Department of Data Science and AI. I've been at Monash since 2001, and when I started at Monash, I was working on image retrieval systems, which is about the problem of retrieving an image from a database given a query image. That was in 2001, that's what I was working on. Around 2012, there was an AI technique that became pretty much something that rendered everything I'd done for the previous 10 years completely useless, called deep learning, and in particular deep convolutional neural networks. Without going into the detail, that solved the image classification problem, image retrieval problem in a completely different way, using sort of advances in computational power, but also very new algorithms, some of which we might talk about tonight. So that line of research kind of evaporated pretty quickly. Since 2015, I've been working on the problem of the application of AI to law enforcement and community safety applications, and I'm directing a research lab called the Alex Lab, which is a collaboration between the Australian Federal Police and Monash, which is all about AI in law enforcement.
Thank you. You see why I like to be here. There's a lot of different angles from AI. So, thank you very much. And as usual with our Monash Tech Talks, we're going to start with questions that I'll ask first. And then we will open up to questions to everyone in the audience, right? So for those physically here, you will have 2 microphones that will run on the side. So be prepared to ask questions. And for those ones who are online, just pop them up in the chat in the YouTube channel. So, all good. Note, the event is being recorded, okay? And then we will put it in the Monash Tech Talk website and broadcast channel. So, for my initial questions, it was great to start preparing for this and figure out what exactly am I going to ask, or what are the things. And it was very interesting because I started looking at what is intelligence. Not artificial intelligence, just intelligence. And I realized that philosophers have been discussing this like forever, and they are not very close to reach an agreement. There's all kinds of definitions, from the original single intelligence, then to the very compartmentalized, that is the mathematic, the spatial, the emotional, all these things, to other ways of looking at like creative, analytical, all these things. I go, wow, okay, I'll forget about that. So it's much more difficult than it sounds to actually define what these things are. So I'm going to start there with a difficult question, and Christoph is going to be you, because you're closer to me. Yes. So let's start there. What do we, academic experts, let's try not to perhaps figure out, but what we mean by AI, at least for today in the panel. When we're talking about AI, what do you think that we're going to mean?
Yeah, exactly. Very good question. And I mean, Maria, you've already said it. So we can't really agree on what is intelligence. So how would we know what is artificial intelligence? And actually, by the way, that happens in many disciplines. So for example, if you look at biology and you ask a biologist what is life, it's very, very difficult to say what is life. But yet they have built this whole research area on investigating that, right? And with artificial intelligence, maybe it's a bit similar. But I mean, intelligence can mean pretty much anything from human-like intelligence, you have a robot that is just as you and me, or, I mean, when artificial intelligence started out maybe 50, 60 years ago, they had like an area that was planning, and these algorithms are still used nowadays, for example, in elevators, right? Like you press the button and the elevator has to decide which of the 4 elevators that are there should come, which is the closest, and so on. So we would probably think that's not very intelligent, but still it's artificial intelligence maybe. And so in the end, I think AI, it's just really, it's a buzzword. It's a word that has a lot of hype. And I'm really often kind of surprised by reading normal media, right, conventional media, and they talk about AI, and then people say, that's not even AI because it's not human-like, it cannot think, it doesn't have a consciousness. And I think, well, of course it doesn't. I mean, we all work in artificial intelligence, and we all know that it's not like that. So I think it's really, you know, if you think human-like intelligence is here, the elevator is somewhere down here, we are, well, somewhere in between, but probably still closer to the elevator than to the human-like intelligence.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And this idea that a lot of, in the pop culture, a lot of people go into the, is a human kind of intelligence. So, but the reality is that we are very much lower. In some sense, I guess that is something that at some point it takes a decision, right? Well, or not, or that is part of it too, right? It makes a decision system that it says, go this way, or I don't know.
And you know, the other thing is, I in my work care much more about whether if it's useful, or whether, I mean, if the algorithms I develop, are they intelligent? I don't know. It's not really a problem
like we were talking about Shazam, which is useful. The little app, awesome. Is that... okay, wonderful. That brings me into this idea of the pop culture. So the pop culture, and how does it differ? How does the concepts that Christoph has been talking about differ from what most people out there think about? Whenever you say artificial intelligence, you immediately, you know, probably would see something like Terminator or something like that, right? A robot of some kind of HAL from 2001. Rashina, what do you think? How does the AI that you think AI is, or the one that Christoph does, differ from that?
Sure, so I get the fun question. With pop culture, as you were rightly pointing to, Maria, some of the original ones that comes to mind are Terminator and R2-D2 or the BB-8 from Star Wars and so on, which have a body and is a robot and there's some intelligence behind it. But I'm going to pick on something that's a bit more recent and that me and I guess my kids are really into, which is the Marvel's Avenger series. So hey kids. And if you remember that, and the character Tony Stark has his alter ego, if you like, or his superhero character, the Iron Man, creates an artificial intelligence system which is Jarvis, and Jarvis is at his beck and call. Jarvis can compute at speed of light, figuratively speaking, very quickly, and be able to take decisions that are like life-saving in some instances for Iron Man, right? So going well beyond just being controlled by Iron Man. So that's the kind of pop fiction or pop culture references that we get. We also have the other one that he created in the Age of Ultron, which was Ultron gone rogue and starting to then take decisions around, all right, I'm a peacekeeping system, and I'm going to decide that in the interest of keeping peace, I'm going to then also, that also includes the creators, and I'm going to, bar them from doing certain stuff. So that is what we see as a vision or the image in pop culture. But when it comes to more relatable things in everyday, some of the things that we use are virtual voice assistants like Alexa or Siri. And so one thing that I tried, and I'm going to try it here, let's see. So the big difference, that we see is taking decisions about morality and then some of the more philosophical ideas, right? So that's what we see in pop culture, but what happens with real world? So let's see if this works. Hey Siri, what's the meaning of life?
Apparently, life is like a box of chocolates. So, sea salt caramel, hazelnut, sour quince log. The point is we've got options.
All right, so that's cool. Now, if you tried that again, Siri is going to give you a different answer. One time I got an answer that said 42. So, what I'm trying to get at is when you work with the real world intelligence that we see around us, it works in a very bounded context, right? The knowledge base is limited to what it has been told, and then it reacts and from a predefined set of answers, and it's only allowed to work within that bounded context. Whereas what we see in pop culture is this very human, near human-like moral decision making. There are no boundaries. You can start to take decisions everywhere. So yeah, it's quite a long way to go, but we're getting very, very close.
That starts putting some context, because as Christoph said, is not here, is more towards here, and Rashina says it's within boundaries. It has a very particular context, and it can only have access to. So it's not particularly good at connecting context of here and there. It's usually very focused on one particular thing. Campbell, can you now tell us then some real examples? What are real examples of things that we use every day and that you would say are artificial intelligence, not pop culture? Or at least with the boundaries that Christoph put, more towards here than here.
Yeah. So, as we've been talking about, algorithms that do specific tasks very well and in a kind of a very smart way. And an iPhone is full of those things. Using your face to log into your iPhone. That's an example of AI. Using Siri, as we were talking about, using, I think it's on the iPhone 13 Pro, cinematic mode that algorithmically separates the foreground and the background and can make, even someone like me look like an amazing cinematographer, producing these amazing videos. But all sorts of things. I mean, our emails are filtered for spam using, for a long time, we've been using machine learning to filter out spam. Doesn't always do a brilliant job, it does a pretty good job. There's all sorts of examples. Banking, when you get an email from your bank that says there might be a problem with a transaction, a lot of that is generated using machine learning, looking for sort of anomalies in transaction patterns. Google Maps, I think we might have covered that, and Maria had some incidences on the way here, which she didn't have her phone. And
I couldn't do a thing.
Does anyone play video games? Looking down the front here, and there's a lot of AI in video games, actually, driving the way that the characters interact. Huge amounts of AI and computational power behind those video games. I could go on and on. Personal digital assistants, and then the whole realm of digital health and applications for medical imaging, diagnostic imaging using AI. Detecting potential melanoma is actually quite a mature technology using AI. So there's a lot of examples, many of which have improved our quality of life. I would say.
That's a great list, by the way. Well done. And it sounds incredibly useful. I personally noticed today I couldn't do a thing. I had to park very far away because I didn't know how close was I to the State Library in my car, because I didn't have my phone and I don't have yet. I have an old car. Anyway, but it doesn't sound particularly intelligent, right? My dog sounds more intelligent than a lot of that. So. And it doesn't really sound like the humanoid ones, which we already have some. I mean, we have what was the name? Sophia, the robot who actually has citizenship in where is it exactly? Saudi Arabian citizenship. Wow, it's a citizen. Is that really intelligence? AI intelligence? What do you think, Christoph? Is AI of that kind really intelligent?
Well, I mean, again, we talked about it. I think it's very difficult to say what is intelligence. And for many people, for example, when you say, well, the map routing algorithm, it's not really intelligent, I would disagree. I mean, it very often gives me suggestions that I take, right? And you know, and then you even talk to your phone, you say like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, thanks Google. So I think we're actually really good in seeing these assistants really or you know, humanizing them in a way. I mean, even if they are not intelligent, even if it's just like your computer with an Excel spreadsheet, you are still just kind of talking to it and like, why did you do that? And why did you do that? So, I mean, it's certainly not human-like intelligence, but it is a form of intelligence to me.
You see, it's fascinating because there's so many. These agreements are great, and I would not count exactly like that intelligence in the sense that.
So maybe another thing. So what is human-like intelligence? If I now go out there and I drink 10 beers, and then the decisions that I'm making, they are maybe not the same that I would make being sober.
Yeah.
Am I still human-like intelligent? Am I now subhuman-like intelligent?
I guess that from my pop culture point of view, I'm still waiting for the Turing test, for the kind of how, it doesn't have to be formed like a robot, I don't care, but that kind of even behind a screen of something that appears to me similar enough in reasoning power, in, you know, linking context, in, you know, a Siri, the movie Her, I think that is called, you know, when you have Joaquin Phoenix, I think that is called, and the operative system is really engaging, and I don't care that is software, it's the way that we react. But you're right, because what the philosophers do talk is about little, you know, the skills, the particularly useful skills that are intelligence. I mean, so part of the intelligence. So I guess that from my pop culture mind, I want a much more formed intelligence, but it's parts of it that I should remember that they are. So you're absolutely right. But how, Rashina, even though it is intelligence, but it's not this fantastic, fantastic intelligence, how we then cut through the hype? Because there's a lot, you know, every week, particularly for us researchers, we get a lot of news of, you know, so-and-so have done this amazing thing. And you go, really? So how do we cut about the hype? What is really useful? What can be done? How do we do that?
Sure. So I guess you know, the ones that are more of the physical form of the robots and the Terminator kind are really like, you know, it's easy to see it when it's there, right? What gets me more excited and slightly even worried is the ones that we don't even realize is artificial intelligence. So for instance, if you were to do a Google search, right? I did a Google search for something, Campbell did a Google search for something, Christoph and Maria did. We're all going to get different results. Now, how is that, you know, what do we then make of reality if we're in the same world, in the same context, different people are getting different results? Now, we may call it personalization, it's more customized to you, but then what about news? If I'm trying to get facts about something and I still get different results to what you get, who is at play here? We don't see a Terminator, but the artificial intelligence behind it is now not just driving what we do in our lives, or, you know, little recommendations of what music to play. It's seriously, you know, meddling with facts or what we think are facts, right? So that for me is the more interesting part. And I guess it also, you know, comes back to things like, you know, the simple tests around what we do to test fake news from real news in terms of testing the authenticity of the source, who is behind it, and asking some of the tougher questions around, sure, it's artificial, but there's somebody behind it who's making it. There's a group of people behind it who's creating this artificial intelligence. What are their sort of principles? Are they following any principles? What are their guidelines? What are their agendas? Are there some agendas? We've got, you know, Musk buying Twitter, right? That made some news. We're not only, you know, recommending little things now, we are forming opinions using AI. So that for me is like the bigger threat than, say, a robot in front of me.
So that goes to the trust.
It does. It does. It goes to the trust, and it goes to the idea of having principles to build the AI. So principles such as it needs to be human-centered. It needs to look at things like, are you securing people's privacy and security? Are you making sure that it's going to make ethical decisions? Is it going to be, the decisions that are being made, are they going to be then contestable even? And is someone accountable at the end of the day? So these things that I've just listed are actually part of the Australian ethical principles, AI principles. We have them. The bigger issue is how do we enforce them? Because right now they're recommendations.
Very good point.
Can I say something
Sure,
on the hype,
go for it.
the hype angle? It's no surprise there's a lot of hype around AI given the size of the commercial industry, the commercial AI industry, which is in the hundreds of billions of dollars, and the estimate is some crazy $1 trillion industry in 5 years. So there's a lot of players, and artificial intelligence is a gold marketing term, intelligence. I'm not just selling you a computer system, I'm selling you an intelligent computer system. And intelligence is good, right? You want that in your business. You want something like that helping you with your decisions. The problem, I think, with the hype is not just that it risks people being disappointed in the technology, but it risks people rushing to technology as a solution very quickly, where it may not be completely the solution. It also, I think, because people know that AI feeds on data and lots of it, can encourage a hoarding of data in some sense without real purpose. And I think we do see this a little bit. That we just need to collect data. We just need to collect data because some AI will help us make sense of that and help us with our decisions. And that's absolutely not always the case.
So that's very interesting because you work with the Australian Federal Police, and you need to make sure that they don't fall into the hype, right? So that they are not going to have. How do you manage to get their expectations to something that is achievable? That they don't, that they are not going to thought, oh, I'm going to get this, and suddenly everything is solved, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that? How do you cut the hype for them when you're talking to them?
Yeah. So I think, the stakes are a lot higher in that environment versus selling more widgets type system. Of course, policing is governed by legislation and very strict regulation around data use and data privacy, so there are some controls there. But absolutely, we're very careful, for instance, in the lab, not to overhype any of the technology that we're developing, to say that it can do things like potentially in the future replace human beings in the policing environment, because that's the last thing you want to do in that environment. Yeah. You want to make sure the human is in the loop, that ultimately a human is making all decisions in those sorts of environments. So we always have that in mind, and the ethical frameworks that Rashina was talking about are again very interesting, but just like you said, operationalising them in practice is a different thing. It's fine to have an ethical framework that says do no harm, be fair, respect privacy. Who's going to disagree with that sort of a framework? But how do you implement that in practice and operationally in law enforcement is quite an interesting mapping.
In the political elections, I'm not going to go into the who would argue with that, but yeah, let's go. Okay, so that is really interesting. Now we have narrowed a bit, we have talked a bit about ethics, hype, how to combat that. Let's try to get a crystal ball out, right? And I'm going to ask all of you, I'm going to start with, you always get the difficult one, Christoph, so you start. So where do you think that AI will be in the future? But let's not make 100 years or 1,000 years. Let's not go into the singularity, etc. Just 20 years, right? In 20 years, what do you think that we will be in terms of artificial intelligence? What we will have, what we will not have. You are welcome to answer what we'll have. Well, don't say we'll not have self-consciousness because duh. Well, I hope duh. Who knows? Well, some people disagree. Disagreement is good. There you go. I love disagreement. So go for it. You can choose any of the two. Okay. What we have, what we don't have.
Well, did I mention that I work in forecasting? That's my research topic. but that actually means that I know how difficult it is to make accurate forecasts.
Yeah.
And so if I mean, just an example, 5 years ago, if I had said, well, there will be COVID and we will be seeing all of these things, nobody would have believed it, right? So
True.
it's really difficult to see where things are going. And also in this AI space, so for example, there was this AlphaGo that won against professional Go players, right? And if you had asked people 5 years ago, they would have probably said, that could be still 20 years ago. And then like 2 years later, it happened.
Yeah.
But then you look at self-driving cars. So last year, everybody said, no, self-driving cars, that in a year's time, they are out there and everybody's going to use it. But obviously, the problem with self-driving cars is that our current algorithms don't really work very well, don't work well enough for them, because sure, you can gather a lot of data. So for example, if you're driving a Tesla, the Tesla would usually just have cameras, gather data, and later it's used by Tesla to build models, right? But in a situation like driving a car, it's not enough to just be 99.9% sure you're not going to run somebody over, right? You need to have more certainty than that,
Yeah.
and that's a big problem. So, yeah, given that, I think it's really very, very difficult to make predictions where everything is going to be in 20 years. But well, I mean,
Just
I
give it a
think
go.
we might have self-driving cars by then that really are self-driving cars in 20 years. I mean, who knows? But
Who knows?
I'm hopeful.
Good. Okay, I'm writing that down. That's the first bet. Rashina, what do you think?
Do we say 10 or 20?
Sorry, 20.
20?
20.
Oh,
Go
20
for 20.
Is heaps. 20 is heaps. So if we think about software engineering as a discipline, it's amazing to imagine it's only over 50 years old. And look what how far we've come. So I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to say that it's actually going to be pretty pervasive, invasive almost, I would say, in all aspects of our lives, as it continues to be. It's going to be in our houses, which it is, but a lot more. I'm hoping, here's hoping that it's actually going to be used for better things like healthcare and digital healthcare, as Campbell was mentioning, and improving the quality of life of people, overcoming human limitations, and and when you combine artificial intelligence with the advances in computational power, like we're up to quantum computing, we're looking into that realm. If you combine that with the hardware improvements, exoskeletons, so we're looking at a very, very close to pop culture future. That's what I'm going to say.
Wow. Okay. Okay, there you go. Campbell.
That was pretty cool.
So we have self-driving cars, almost human-like exoskeletons.
I would agree that it's going to be more pervasive. I think the Internet of Things and AI will converge. I don't want to put a downer on things too much, but and I think it's absolutely true that computational power will increase, data collection will increase, but there's only so much that can happen before there's a reckoning around the sustainability and the resource implications of that. And I think that's something that we'll probably come up against prior to 20 years. I think these data centers use enormous amounts of energy, for instance. That's a problem for the planet. So I think there's going to have to be some sort of reckoning as to sustainable AI, but I agree that it will become much more pervasive.
I mean, metaverse, right?
Ooh.
We're here.
Yeah, well, we're on Second Life, but let's not go there again, because, I'll disagree with that one. We were Second Life. I will Ready Player One, what a book. But, I'm not that sure about. But that's.
But hopefully we can use it, as I said, for better things, like even exploring life outside of this world and so on. Those are the things to look forward to, rather than looking at what I ate last and what can you do with that information to sell me more stuff.
Yeah, I know, to sell you more stuff. Absolutely. But so Campbell, you mentioned energy and how much it consumes, and as a big, also for us researchers, is a big issue of how much experimentations we do, because. So let's start talking, and that goes to consequences, right, and effects and impact. So let's start into real effects of artificial intelligence. and probably, well, jobs for politics. So probably job security is one of the things that are mostly in minds of people often with artificial intelligence. So, Christoph, has AI led to job losses? And yes or no, but will it do so? What do you think?
Yeah, good question. And that's one of the questions I actually get most, I think. That's what people very often are worried about. And I think, well, will it lead to job losses? I think not necessarily, or it doesn't have to. So we have a choice. So will it lead to changes? Yes, definitely. So think about, just think about 50 years ago. What were the jobs that people were doing? I mean, there was certainly nobody selling phones. There was certainly, well, or if you go back, 100 years, and then suddenly there were cars, so that changed everything. Already the computers, I mean, we don't remember because now it's so normal to just have a computer, to have a phone. But think about 1970, you walk out there, the jobs would be different. So in that sense, I think AI will be just more of the same in that sense. So people will need to, some jobs will disappear, other jobs will appear. But now, so I think if we use the AI only to get rid of people, that would be very short-sighted. So, I mean, Campbell already mentioned that before. I think what we want to do is we want to have the both working together. And it's really about, I mean, so for example, just I think 2 weeks ago, I talked to a doctor and she said, well, at some point will the AI do my job? And I would say, well, look, there are many people in the world that don't have access to any doctor at all. You right now, I mean, I don't have access to a doctor 24/7 just on the phone. So there's just so much more we could do instead of just doing the same and just getting rid of people. I mean, the AI can solve the simple problems, and then the people have more time to solve the more interesting problems. Or like in healthcare, you can always employ more people in healthcare.
Definitely
right? And in other areas as well. So I think it would be very short-sighted to think the only thing that's going to happen is we're going to lose jobs.
Interesting, yeah, okay. So it will probably make some jobs disappear and it will make other jobs appear, like many other technologies have done. I do completely agree with that. Jobs is one thing, but there's many others that have effects, right? One of them is privacy. And, very clear concern when using technology, and the smarter the technology, the bigger the risk in some sense. So I guess that the next kind of immediate worry for a lot of people is, will AI lead to a surveillance nightmare, right? Is that the thing? And how can we ensure that this does not happen, right? So, Campbell, what do you think? For this, it has to be you who answers this. What do you think? You have a lot of experience.
No
Surveillance nightmares.
Not on civilians, but on the importance of and the dangers of.
Right. Well, newsflash, you're already under surveillance.
Indeed.
In the sense that there's a lot of data that's being collected. People are willingly giving their data away, I would say, through all sorts of apps, their position, all sorts of attributes about how they're interacting with commerce, etc. That data is being sold. That it's sold often to other services that aggregate that data and then sell it on again. That's a form of surveillance, I think, through data. But I guess what you're getting at is the concern around unwilling participation in surveillance, I suppose. I think
some of that is unwilling, very unwilling and very unknown.
There are, 68 pages of terms and conditions that you agree in some sense. But yeah, I think the answer to not having cameras and sensors everywhere and AI being used for live facial recognition and this sort of thing is legislation, regulation, matching to community expectations. And it is important to say that those community expectations and what is ethical with AI do differ from place to place. I think it's fair to say that. But I think those are whole of community decisions that need legislation to govern the use of AI. And you know, the extreme case, it's not so much surveillance, but in terms of harms would be autonomous weapons, and you know, that's something I think we need actual international bans on.
That is something that really, really worries me, because that does not require a lot of intelligence, I have to say, and it's so attractive for some. Yeah, very, very good point. Okay, so jobs, losses, surveillance, ethics. You have talked a little bit about ethics, Roshina. I want you to talk a little bit more about it, because there's a lot of things that software are helping us right now, but it's also helping us decide right now. So what about fairness, transparency, responsibility? All these things you said that they are defined somewhere and they need to be regulated, but it's very difficult to enforce. What about what we have right now? Do you think that the AI that we have right now is ethical? In this, you know, that Christoph was talking about, the one that we're talking about, is that ethical?
So I'll give you an example, and then I might even just throw it out to the audience to decide. So one example is people who use Twitter. This happened not too long ago. When you post a photo of people, text, and so on, the software usually crops out a thumbnail image that you see as the first image, and then you can click on it to expand to see the whole image. That thumbnail, coming to that thumbnail, the decision to do that, was based on the software was prioritizing people over text. So that if there was text or some inanimate object, it would prioritize the person into the thumbnail. That part is fine. Now, if there was a male or a female, it would prioritize the male. If it was a white person versus a person of color, it would prioritize the white person. So is that ethical? What do we think? So the short answer to that is, for a lot of AI systems, and the really popular ones right now, the short answer is no, in my books anyway. And we have a long way to go to try and get there. And Twitter, for just completing that story, has promptly fixed that situation. But it shouldn't come to that, right? And it's not, and the other thing I should also say, because I study software development teams, is what I do for research. It's not like there are software developers sitting there in little, you know, dark dungeons going, ha, what malicious software can I build today? No one does that, right? These are, you know, good people wanting to do the right thing, but it's when you have unconscious biases that creep into your software because you weren't thinking, or maybe because the software team that was developing that feature and the people that they tested on wasn't diverse enough. It was just a bunch of white, you know, young male, and that's what it then learned to prioritize. And if it was a more diverse team, like we have at our humanized lab, it truly is diverse, then you would have software systems that would be more, you know, appropriate for human-centered values and be more ethical. So yeah, we have a long way to go.
So that refers to the biases of the data, often when the data algorithms.
Yeah, and the lack of diversity of the teams building it. Yeah.
There's other. We're getting to. I'm starting to get. I think that we're going to start soon having some saying, "Hey Maria, it's time for the questions." I just wanted to say on that one that there's also yes and no, in the sense that I come from the optimization part, right? And in that one, it's much more rules-based or constraints-based, or you know, knowledge, symbolic knowledge. And in that, you can optimize for a lot of things. And some of the things that you can optimize are not particularly ethical or particularly fair. And sometimes you don't notice. For example, you're allocating funds. You know, we work with the UN to allocate funds to different. This is being recorded, and I'm going into blank. Crisis. To different crises and different things, right? You can do it in ways without noticing that are really unfair to particular areas, to particular types of crisis, because the donations are with rules, right? And the rule says, you know, this particular donation can only be done for this or for that. So, but you could do it. UN, of course, doesn't do it, but you could program it to be favorite your own country or your own whatever. And if you're optimizing for something that optimizes your company, imagine that, things like that. So, well, I think that there's no software engineers going, well, except, you know, there's hackers and there's all this kind of things.
Yes.
But, well, I think
by and large,
that by and large, the software teams don't do it on purpose.
Yeah.
I think that it's very easy to not only bias by data, but also to bias by not thinking of what your software is going to end up impacting and who is going to end up impacting. So we really need to be careful. We really need to be careful, and the software teams need to be very aware of this. So yeah, Sam, I can see you going like that. Time for questions from the audience here physically and online. So yeah, there's two of them. Let's start with that one. And there, and then we will go to you.
Yes, hi. I've got a question for Campbell. You were talking about image processing before, and I wanted to know if we should be concerned about deep fakes, and if there is any way to combat that to be able to detect what's real and what's not.
That is an awesome question. And the answer is absolutely yes, we should be concerned about deepfakes because they're extremely good. What is being generated now it's very hard to distinguish, and in fact, from an actual image or video of someone making a speech that they didn't make, for instance, detection of deepfakes is getting increasingly difficult. And you know, there is efforts on the detection side, there's from computer science community, also efforts somewhat on the prevention side to sort of, I suppose, guarantee provenance of genuine images and videos, but it's a very active area of research. Absolutely, we should be worried about that. In the broader misinformation picture, I think deepfakes are right up there with a real concern.
Well, we have seen a very dumb version of deepfake with some of the elections when we have had photographs of independents put as greens, and you know, it's not really intelligent, but it works really well because you don't, and even that is the person talking, and yeah, very good. There was a question here too.
This is, oh my goodness, that was so loud. This is a question for all three of you, I guess. Just talking about like those ethical regulations and how they're just regulations, they're not legislation. Can you speak a bit to like the challenges of legislating for software development and like any discussions that are happening like in your workplaces or between you guys about that kind of stuff?
My mind kind of goes to some of the trials that we see played out in the US with, say, Mark Zuckerberg being held to account or being asked questions and so on every now and then. That's about as close as we get to having a real discussion around accountability for software and what it can do. But I think at the end of the day, we have to realize that software, like any other kind of engineering, has the ability to impact millions of instances of the same thing in a matter of seconds. No other engineering discipline can do that, right? And therefore, somebody needs to be accountable. For the longest while, it was the fact that, software developers, we would develop the tool. It's up to the users what they do with it. We can't be held responsible. So the individuals would, sort of shirk responsibility that way. The corporates might be more focused on the commercial side, and they're like, oh, we would just need to sell stuff because this is selling. So at the end of the day, I think when it goes into the legislations, as you were rightly talking about, I'm not aware, certainly Campbell may have more to say on that, of what's happening currently with regards to making it a lot more formal and a lot more strict. But yeah, there are lots and lots, way too many guidelines right now. In fact, well, that's one part of the problem is too many guidelines on ethics, but not enough legislation. But Campbell, do you have more?
Fully agree. The problem, of course, is legislation is incredibly slow, and the technology is moving incredibly fast. I can give you one example of an ethical issue that we came up against recently in the lab, which was not so much something that would be governed by legislation, but more of a data collection practice, I suppose, in computer science, which is that one of the things we're interested in doing is to use image classification algorithms to identify very offensive and very illegal imagery in seized devices, for example. And I won't go into too much detail as to what that might be, but one of the things that we're interested in doing is to determine potentially the age of people in those images, and one of the ways to do that, which is a wickedly difficult computer vision problem, incredibly difficult problem.
Difficult for me.
It's difficult for humans.
Yeah.
But if you're going to try and do it, what you want to do is collect a whole lot of training data of people at different ages. How do you do that? Well, a lot of computer scientists, to be honest, have just scraped the web for pictures of children. Right? The problem with that is that you're using images you have no idea about what the consent was, what the provenance of that image was. You're using it for a particular purpose of training algorithms to do a particular thing. So we've come up against that in the lab, and we've actually thought of a way around it, we think, which is to essentially have a crowdsourcing effort. Love to publicise this to you all, and this is a sneak preview of what we're going to do, where adults would send to us images of themselves as children, because that's a situation where we can guarantee consent.
Good idea.
Children cannot consent for their images. Look out for that on the Monash web pages.
That's a
we look
very...
for that. But that's just one example, I guess, of an ethical dilemma. But legislation is not going to necessarily solve that problem. But there's all sorts of dilemmas, I think, that we're dealing with all the time as the technology evolves, and we have to rapidly adapt our practices, I think.
And that brings issues of the knowledge of the people doing the legislation on AI or on software, or that is on technology in general. The political issues, it's like Europe seems to be more successful at making legislation safe for privacy things and consent and things like that. It's really interesting, but yeah. We could. That's why I like being here, because we could be talking about this for 13 hours. Is there any more questions? Another one? I think that.
So we have one just coming in from the live stream from John. So this is considering usual self-driving car argument. I think referring to what you were talking about, Christoph, earlier. Do you need it to be perfect or just better than accident-prone humans?
Good
and what
question.
do you think of that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I do agree. Well, and I mean, it's something I thought about. Well, again, it goes a bit back to what I talked about earlier, right? So even humans are in different states of mind. So maybe if you are a bit distracted or things like that, you are more prone to errors. I think in the end, well, on the one hand, you might want to say, no, they need to react better than a human in every instance and not only on average. So you don't just want to say, we now have 100 accidents less per year in all of Australia, but obviously that would now be different accidents. So maybe somebody has died who with a human driver wouldn't have died, and maybe 2 people were saved, but now the question is, well, is that good enough, or do we really need to be better in every single instance? I think, to be honest, what we are seeing at the moment in other countries, maybe in the US, is that they seem to accept that it's good enough to just be better on average, right? So you just say, well, we kind of, yeah. Yeah,
I was just going to add that the issue also is one of liability when things do go wrong. Who's accountable?
And explainability. What happened?
And how do you explain what happened? Who do you sue? Who do you prosecute if a self-driving autonomous car hits someone? And
what if you find that is on average, but actually is killing all the babies, right? Because it's not recognizing them or something, right? It's so fraught with and we're already seeing some of the deaths and the lawsuits coming after that and saying, hey, particularly when we have people like Tesla's putting games on their consoles, which is like, but anyway, it's, again, the hype versus the reality, right? Sorry, there was another question here.
Do I just turn this? Oh, just talking to it. Oh, hi, can you hear me? I think the problem is that a lot of people treat ethics as being a one-size-fits-all category when there are many different frameworks in thinking ethically, because I used to teach digital ethics, and I would spend, a lot of the course teaching the students about the kind of, past 2,500 years plus of philosophy, applied philosophy that deals with ethical thinking, right? Yeah. And that was really a chore, trying to condense all of that. So it's when you're thinking about the difference between right and wrong, are you talking about the Confucian approach? Are you talking about utilitarianism? Are you talking about Aristotelian virtue ethics? Even the kind of religious approaches to morality? And kind of coming into the 20th century, the kind of postmodernist approaches and so forth. And it seems like you need to have a lot of knowledge to actually deal with differentiating right from wrong. And it's kind of meant, I think ethics is meant to be something that kind of makes us think about what we do, to create a reflective practitioner. It's not meant to be a set of guidelines that are enforced, because that to me is not ethics, that's legislation or governance.
Exactly.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And without slandering computer scientists, we're all, there's a tendency towards sort of, or how would banal reductionism, I suppose I can say. But this is why we need, and we do it at Monash, to work with the ethicists. So I know we work with our humanities faculty, with the ethicists. I have no idea what they're talking about a lot of the time, but absolutely need that input into these frameworks and these, because it's very nuanced and it's very specific to particular cases.
It's kind of I think the meta-ethics space that we're getting into, in terms of, mentioning where different countries and different cultures might have views on morality, say for example capital punishment, right? So there's no one view around the world around whether it is or isn't, and so on. So and to the point about reductionism, I think there's some kind of a balance that needs to be met, about, okay, these are guidelines, but at some stage you have to then take those abstract guidelines into ways that can then legislate software, because it's impacting everyday life. So yeah, we're still, I think those are the open questions in research, and it's what you mentioned in terms of working with people who are experts in ethics, that I think is the key, to have interdisciplinary teams where you're bringing in knowledge from a whole, different perspectives to come in. And so technologists can't solve all the problems of technology. We need other people, we need other disciplines.
And that's why getting the interdisciplinary can help on people knowing that there could be biases, that there could be different, for example, you were talking about for fairness, right? Different definitions of fairness, the Roche and the utilitarianism, and how you could build a system that allows you to test different ones, and which one is the one that, so it's a combination of awareness and trying to make it more ethical, less biased, less whatever, and some regulation that says, no company, you cannot do this, and good. There was another question there. Sorry.
Hello. Yeah, thank you so much for the great discussion, everybody. I just wanted to circle back to the question of where we see things going in 20 years' time. And in reference to, last year we seen the Tesla bot being launched, potentially coming out in 2022. But I wanted to touch on, firstly, what are your thoughts on that? And secondly, how you imagine products with intelligence impacting our daily lives in this time period?
Yeah, good question. I mean, one thing that before I actually wanted to add, and I didn't, is I think it's very helpful to say, well, if we want to know where are we in 20 years, let's just go 20 years back and then ask us this question, like 20 years ago, where would we have thought we would be now in 20 years' time? And it's probably quite different. And now to this question of how do we see these products affecting everyday lives? I mean, already they are affecting everyday lives. I mean, everybody who has a phone uses these sorts of technologies, and we've heard from Maria how lost she was without a phone. I mean, just try to live for 4 days without your phone.
Or an afternoon.
Or one afternoon.
Now, and that the mobile phone from Apple came out in 2007. I remember perfectly because I was in the US and I got one. And it's 2007. It's not even 20 years ago, and it has completely changed the way we operate. Right? Social media, our kids. Right? I have 2 teenagers, and they are all this. So absolutely, we sometimes don't understand how the power of little changes or little things that look little have massive impact on things. Yeah, it's very, very, very good question. Another one here.
Hi, actually that segues neatly into my question. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious to most people that our culture and our society has been affected by the AI that you've been talking about, you know, on stage today. You know, our attention spans, our interrelationships, our political influences. I mean, we were talking about, you know, what are facts? How do you see, as AI experts, I mean, is it possible that the very technology that has influenced our culture and our society negatively, do you think that that is the answer to combat these problems? Or do you think, as you were talking about outside influences, do we have to change it in some other way? If you think that there is a solution that is AI-based, how would that solution be applied, and what would that solution be?
Wow. I mean, I think a good example here is if you say fake news on social media, and now we try to use AI to actually detect this. So I think AI can be part of the answer to really have AI systems that try to solve some of these problems that we have introduced with social media and so on. But on the other hand, I think it's also, I mean, the technology cannot do everything. So like we develop technology, but still you can use it in one way or the other. So really there are questions that are not technological questions.
Yeah. I think there's a lot more scope for thought experiments about this, around where we would be. I think we don't do enough of that. Thinking, but I mean, in some sense, we're like slowly boiled frogs, right? Or we have been over the years. We just, you know, talking about the advent of the mobile phone, I just thought it was such a ridiculous idea back in 2007. Who would want to check email on their phone? Who would want to be contactable when, I'm really old obviously, who would want to be contactable when they're away from a phone at any time of the day or night? Why would you want that? Facebook, why would you want to connect with everyone? You know, I just can't handle it. It's too much connection. And in some sense, it's promoted a kind of I would say, a kind of a lowest common denominator across these massive networks, and humans aren't built for that sort of massive connection at scale, I think. So, you know, a little bit of just thinking about these things, rather than, again, rushing to technology as a solution, might be the way to go.
Sorry.
I was just thinking, 2 thoughts that kind of popped into my head. One was around, you know, Campbell, you kind of questioning Facebook or these software. So I think it kind of comes down to, just because we can develop it doesn't mean we should develop it. So there's that questioning of not just a commercial need for a product, but is this needed for the human race, or is this going to benefit humanity? So it's that social good factor that we really promote at Monash, for example, that we live by, to be honest. And the other aspect was just combining your question with the other one before about the bots. Definitely, I think AI can be part of the solution. So it's not all, doom and gloom, because imagine bots and so on. We already have little, those humanoid robots that can be in aged care facilities, for instance, that are providing companionship. I mean, it sounds sad, but it does make a difference to lives of some people to have those types of facilities available. So it can be part of that solution. Now, whether you want bots to be doing something else, how comfortable you are for them to be on standby and then bump into them in the night and what happens then. So those are all kind of other scenarios for leisure and comfort. But for when we talk about improving, again, it goes back to the limitations and of the human race as such, and then trying to improve that situation with AI. So what good can we do with that? So I really like that angle you've put to the panel today with what we can do better with AI.
and in some sense is also a back to principles that you're talking about thought, thinking about it. Privacy, we have been dealing with it for a very long time, right? We have very clear rules of when you can go into the house of someone or not, or when you can search different countries, but there's very clear rules of when is the balance between privacy and benefit for society or things like that. So going back to first principles and not just technology immediately, boom, that could also be a thing.
And not anthropomorphizing AI so much.
Yeah.
I think already there's a tendency to do that. The AI did this, the AI decided that, the AI can do this. But it's actually it's us.
It's us,
right?
yeah.
AI errors are human errors, right?
Yeah.
And we're in control of our destiny.
Very much.
That.
Sam is giving me the evil eye because we are way over. You see, we could be talking forever, and it's really interesting. I really want to, first of all, thank everyone online, everyone who has made the effort to come here. Our fantastic panel. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you.
Our fantastic host. Yes.
And also, of course, the state. And also, of course, the State Library, the City of Melbourne, and Monash University, and our wonderful organisers, because they don't get enough of the applause. And they organize everything. They give us our run sheets, what you have to do. They put us in microphones. They make sure that we sound and look fantastic. So thank you so much, and nice to see you. That's it. There you go. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. That was really good.
Thank